Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something really fascinating, a different way to think about designing for the future.
Yeah, in this deep dive, we're going to unpack a method called post-futures. It's all about using something called data fiction to imagine and shape what might come next.
And our source for this is an academic paper, Post-Futures, a speculative design method integrating data fiction for design futures education by Maciejko and Alejandro Lecuna. Now, designing for the future. It's tough, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're dealing with so many unknowns. Environmental changes, new tech popping up, how people's needs might shift. It's inherently uncertain.
Yeah, solving a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Exactly. And traditional design often relies heavily on past data, what we already know. But the future, it might not follow those lines at all. What about big disruptions?
Right. And that's where something like speculative design comes in handy. It's about imagining those potential futures, the what-ifs.
Uh-huh. But even then, if you're only speculating based on today's data, you might still miss the really radical shifts.
So this is the gap that data fiction tries to fill.
Precisely. Think of it as, imagined data. Data for futures that don't exist yet. It comes from asking those what-if questions, especially when you just don't have the real-world data points.
It gives you something to grab onto when speculating.
Yeah, exactly. A framework.
And this paper lays out a specific way to use it, the post-futures method. 6 steps. Designed for teaching, and it uses science fiction films. That's an interesting source.
It really is. They tested it in Germany in a design course. Sci-fi films become the source for this data fiction, helping students envision future worlds and the artifacts within them.
So what's the main goal of the paper then?
Well, twofold, really. First, to properly define data fiction, give it some solid grounding. And second, to introduce their post-futures method as a tool to spark more imaginative thinking about the future in design education.
And help develop actual future tech ideas.
Yes, and also, importantly, to build on existing ideas cumulatively. That's a key point they make.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. Data in design. Traditionally, it's pretty central, wouldn't you say, for ideas, development, checking if things work.
Absolutely. It's standard practice. You use research, information to understand users, markets, all that. And now, with so much data available, it's even more emphasized.
We hear about designing from data or designing with data.
Right. Designing from data is where the insights directly inspire the creation. Designing with data means thinking about how the product itself interacts with data streams like user info over time.
But then the paper suggests data isn't this purely neutral thing. It calls it a designed artifact. What does that imply?
It means the data itself is shaped by choices. What do you choose to measure? How do you record it? How do you interpret it? Those are all design decisions.
Ah, I see. So it's not just raw fact. It's already been filtered and framed.
Exactly. It carries the imprint of how it was created. It's not entirely objective.
That really makes you think differently about data-driven decisions, which kind of connects to this other idea they bring up. Truth-irrelevant speculations in futures research. Sounds weird.
It does sound a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? But the point isn't about being right in predicting the future.
Okay, so what is the point?
It's about opening up thinking, generating new ideas, widening the scope of what you even consider. These speculations, whether they turn out true or not, help explore possibilities, understand underlying mechanisms, and foster reflection.
So it's more about the process of exploration than hitting a specific target.
Precisely. It helps us explore diverse scenarios, think critically about now and the future.
And how does this contrast with relying too heavily on current data for future thinking?
Well, the paper argues that leaning too much on existing data can actually box you in. It encourages linear thinking, just extending current trends outwards.
And that means you might miss the big unexpected shifts.
Exactly. You risk overlooking those black swan events, those things that come out of left field and change everything, because your data didn't point there.
Right. So these truth-irrelevant speculations, how do they actually help us, practically speaking?
They act like bridges, connecting our current understanding to concepts that might seem really far out there. Engaging with them helps us reflect on the present, see it through a potential future lens. It's about perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. Speculation is a tool for reflection. And a major way we speculate is through stories, narratives. Which brings us, naturally, to science fiction.
Absolutely. The paper talks about science fictioning as a specific foresight method. It's storytelling about possible futures.
Some people might just see sci-fi as adventure, spaceships, and aliens.
Sure, that's part of it. But it's also deeply tied to our technological imaginaries, our hopes and fears about where society is heading.
And seeing characters grapple with future challenges using future tech,
Hmm.
that makes it relatable, doesn't it? Even in wild scenarios.
Definitely. It often reflects present-day concerns projected forward. And crucially, sci-fi doesn't give one prediction. It explores multiple futures, a whole spectrum of possibilities.
And the paper argues that this very imaginative, sometimes constraint-free nature is actually good for creativity and design.
Yes, exactly. Because it often ignores current feasibility issues. When you're not immediately worried about, can we build this now, it frees you up to think more radically.
Takes the pressure off practicality for a moment.
Right. And that freedom can spark real innovation.
And what about using existing sci-fi films or books? Is there an advantage there compared to starting from scratch?
Oh, absolutely. You're tapping into a shared cultural awareness, a pool of existing future visions. These stories often resonate with underlying anxieties or desires already present in society. It gives you a common starting point.
The paper also mentions related ideas like diegetic prototypes or design fictions. How do they connect?
They're all kind of cousins in this space. They use fictional elements, sometimes even physical props from imagined futures, not necessarily as workable designs, but as prompts.
Prompts for discussion.
Yeah, to spark conversation, make abstract future ideas more concrete and debatable. They're tools for thinking and talking about implications.
So sci-fi isn't about accurate prediction, but inspiration, helping us think non-linearly about time and design.
Exactly that. Exploring possibilities, not calculating probabilities. It provides these rich worlds, which leads us back to how we get useful information out of them, this data fiction idea.
Right, let's nail down that definition. We've skirted around it. What is data fiction, concisely?
Okay, so data fiction is imagined, anticipated, or maybe inferred data for future scenarios. Its job is to give an explanatory framework for things that might happen in the future, especially when real data is missing or just can't account for big changes.
Got it. So it helps us reason about the future when our current numbers don't cut it.
That's the core benefit, yes. It lets us build these speculative scenarios, even whole worlds, which then helps in designing things that might fit into those worlds. It's also about storytelling, how future data might be interpreted.
And where does it come from? Is it just pure fantasy?
Not purely arbitrary, no. It arises from hypothetical, exploratory, or design-driven speculative future inquiries. It's about exploring alternatives, not predicting one outcome. So it might come from trends or hints within existing stories, or even thinking, what if things had gone differently?
And you mentioned traditional data struggles with unexpected events.
Yeah.
How does data fiction help there?
Well, because it embraces imagination, it can actually offer ways to think about those extreme, far-fetched events that normal models ignore. It opens up a much wider range of future possibilities to consider. It provides a kind of scaffolding for that speculative thinking.
But it's not totally unmoored from reality, right? The paper links it to faint signals or weak signals. What are those?
Faint signals are like, well, small things happening now, or even subtle details in a fictional world that don't seem like a big deal but could point towards a major future shift. They're the early warnings, maybe, often hidden in plain sight.
So finding data fiction in faint signals is like looking for the seeds of the future in unexpected corners.
You got it. And it boosts creativity because any little detail could potentially blossom into something huge and surprising down the line. It acknowledges that the future isn't always a straight line from the present.
And importantly, data fiction is future-focused and imaginative, not just extending today's trends.
Crucial distinction. Trend extrapolation assumes continuity. Data fiction allows for breaks, for transformations, especially when you connect it to those faint signals.
Which brings us back to why sci-fi films are proposed as such a good source.
Yeah, because they are packed full of these imagined worlds, full of potential faint signals, and implicitly contain tons of data about how those futures work, the tech, the society, the environment. Plus, like you said, sci-fi has a proven track record of sparking creative thought.
So by working with the data fiction embedded in sci-fi, designers can basically practice thinking about alternative futures.
Exactly. Practice anticipating and shaping a wider range of possibilities, using sci-fi landscapes as a kind of training ground.
Okay, foundations laid. Let's get into the method itself, the post-futures method. The 6 steps. Can you give us the overview?
Sure. It's presented as a systematic way to use faint signals and data fiction in design education. It treats speculation not just as creative play, but as part of discovery. It's broken into 3 main stages: data fiction, world fiction, and fiction artifact. And within those are the 6 steps.
All right, let's walk through them. Step 1, science fiction future. What happens here?
This is the deep dive into the film. Students pick a sci-fi movie and really analyze it, the story, the characters, but also the visuals, the aesthetics, the tech design, the mood. The goal is to actively pull out elements they see as data fiction.
Okay, so any detail, big or small, could be a piece of data fiction. Then step 2.
Step 2 is faint signals. Now, they scan that film world specifically for the less obvious stuff, the hidden clues, the faint signals that hint at bigger changes or underlying trends. They might even map these out to see connections.
Looking beneath the surface. Then step 3, post-future scenario, moving into the world fiction stage.
Right. Based on the film and the data fiction they found, students create their own future scenario. It's not just copying the movie's future, but a future derived from it. Big emphasis here on world building, making it feel consistent and plausible internally.
And a world needs people. Step 4, post-future characters.
Exactly. You create personas who would realistically live in the world you just built. They should reflect that world, its values, its challenges. The method suggests writing day-in-the-life stories for them, focusing on how they interact with technology.
Bringing the world to life through its inhabitants. Step 5 is post-future narrative. Well, sounds like story time.
It is. You develop a story for one of your characters, but the key plot point involves a technology failing or malfunctioning in a way that changes things for the character. This pulls from science fiction prototyping, exploring what happens when future tech breaks down.
Ah, so not just the shiny future, but the glitches too, which reveals more about the society. And finally, step 6, post-future technology. Design time.
Yes, this is where it culminates. You ideate and prototype a fiction artifact. This is a piece of technology used by your character, central to the story you just wrote, and it should embody aspects of the post-future world you designed.
Wow, okay, so it's a really connected flow.
Yeah.
Analyze fiction, find signals, build a new world, populate it, create a tech failure story, design the tech involved. Very thorough.
It really is. It gives a structure to go from analysis right through to a tangible design concept, all sparked by that initial data fiction from the film.
And you said this was used in a real course in Germany. Tell us about that. Which films did they use? How did it play out?
Yeah, in a bachelor's design course, students chose from Blade Runner, Brazil, The Fifth Element, or Total Recall. Good choices.
Classic sci-fi fodder.
Definitely. So over the semester, they followed the 6 steps. They analyzed their film, identified signals and data fiction, extrapolated trends, and importantly, created concept art to visualize their post-future scenarios.
So visual communication was key too.
Very much so. Then they developed their characters, imagined their daily tech interactions, and wrote those short stories about a technology failure. Finally, they picked one tech idea from their story and developed it further.
How far did they take the development?
It involved making quick, low-fidelity prototypes, hands-on mock-ups, plus detailed sketches and drawings. And interestingly, they had to create a product warning for their fictional artifact.
A product warning. That's clever. Forces you to think about the downsides, the risks, the ethics.
Exactly. It pushes that critical reflection.
The paper gives the WOT robot from Brazil as an example, right? Can you break that one down?
Sure. So the student working with Brazil keyed in on that pervasive theme of surveillance, a major faint signal and source of data fiction in the film.
Hard to miss in Brazil.
Right. So they imagined a post-future where creativity is forbidden and tech is all about control. They created concept art for this oppressive world.
Okay, bleak. And the character.
A laid-off chemical worker who finds out about government brain implants used for surveillance. The story was about this character and others trying to resist, planning to use a small AI worm robot to hack the system and sort of regain consciousness.
Very thematic. And the robot itself, the WOT, the fiction artifact.
WOT stood for Wormbot. In their scenario, it was initially designed for legit tasks, getting into tight spaces, repairs, maybe security checks, self-healing shell, cameras, sensors, designed for confined spaces.
Sounds practical enough.
Yeah, and the student made a lo-fi physical model and detailed drawings. But the crucial part, connecting back to Brazil,
With how it could be repurposed.
exactly. While it had benign uses in this hyper-surveillance state, its real significance for the resistance was its potential for spying back, for intervening in the system. It perfectly reflected those themes of control and privacy erosion from the film's data fiction.
That's a great example of how the artifact embodies the world.
Yeah.
So overall, what's the big takeaway on the value of this method and using data fiction this way?
The authors stress that it's not about predicting the future accurately. It's about facilitating speculation about alternative futures. It builds future consciousness, helps designers prepare for the unexpected, the far-fetched stuff, pushing them beyond today's constraints.
So it stretches their thinking, makes them more adaptable. How does data fiction itself enable that?
It gives a concrete way to picture these speculative futures and their implications. And using diverse sources, like these films, integrates foresight into the design process, makes it creative, not just analytical.
And what did the students themselves say about it?
They really felt it helped them learn future-oriented thinking and think about the future through design. They found using sci-fi films, with their focus on tech within a narrative, really useful for thinking about innovation and impact.
And we know sci-fi has inspired real tech tablets, AI assistants.
For sure. Students said it sparked speculative ideas and gave them creative freedom.
Did it also make them think critically about the consequences of the tech they were imagining?
Absolutely. Echoing those tech failures in the sci-fi stories prompted reflection on societal, cultural, ethical implications, seeing tech not just as cool gadgets, but within a whole context, with potential downsides.
And one last point the paper makes, it's a cumulative approach. What does that mean for design education?
Well, in real-world design, you rarely start from zero, right? You build on existing work, adapt ideas. This method teaches that. Students practice taking existing concepts, the film's world, its tech, and creatively adapting, extending them.
So it mirrors professional practice.
In a way, yes. It's practice in building on ideas iteratively, inspired by the richness of the sci-fi source material, all within a learning environment.
Okay, so wrapping up, the post-futures method, using sci-fi and data fiction, seems like a really potent mix. Structured yet creative, pushing beyond typical data analysis to explore futures and what they mean for design.
That sums it up well. It's about expanding minds, fostering creativity, prompting reflection on the futures we might be creating, not just trying to guess the one right future.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, listening. How could you maybe use a similar data fiction approach outside of design, in your own work, your own life? Could it help anticipate a wider range of futures? What faint signals might be around you today that hint at what's coming tomorrow? It really highlights how powerful imaginative thinking can be, even drawing from fiction as we try to navigate the uncertainties ahead. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.